What is up, Steeler fans? Welcome back to another episode of the Steelers Hangover. There's been some news now to talk about, some actual news, as Mike Tomlin has spoken to news media sources at the owners' meeting over this past couple of days. A lot of interesting stuff to come out. Shannon, how you doing? Welcome back.
I'm doing great, and I feel nice and comfortable, unlike Mike Tomlin, because when I was talking to him and asked him questions, he was sweating like crazy. I don't know if it was hot. It's usually hot. Ain't it in Arizona?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
it's in Florida, which is
it's hot too. Yes, but I mean, I've never seen him sweating that bad.
Well, I mean, it's either look like Tomlin sweating, or you can look like who was a Kaboli who looked like he was asleep there.
Yeah.
One or the other. It didn't look good. Wasn't a good look for the Steelers Steelers news media right there. First things first, everybody's mind was Aaron Rodgers. He visited the facility. He's had a throwing session in the middle of March, or the tail end of March, with the newly signed wide receiver, newly acquired wide receiver, DK Metcalf. I think that all signs are pointing to Aaron Rodgers to the Pittsburgh Steelers. I know that may not be something that you were hoping to hear, but I think that's what's going to come. Have you accepted it yet?
No. I've been leaning to the fact that it wasn't going to happen, and then, as you say, with him having that throwing session with DK, after it was his idea to come to the facilities the week prior and talk to everybody. And then there was a rumor today, like we were talking before the show on Twitter, that Aaron Rodgers was looking at a house outside of Pittsburgh. So, that kind of, as you say, the stars are aligning that he might want to come. And if you're throwing to Metcalf, who's a freak, you're throwing to Pickens, they're talking about maybe drafting another guy, and the talent already on hand, Rodgers might need that to get those old man juices flowing again.
Yeah, I mean, maybe. I think that, I think he likes the limelight. I think he likes, and Aaron Rodgers, that is. I think he likes everybody waiting on pins and needles for his decision on what he's going to do. And I think that those that are in the need to know, like the Steelers organization, some of their star players, they probably already have their answer. I strongly suspect that there is some sort of, handshake agreement that's going on, and maybe perhaps they're waiting for some sort of event to disclose it or to reveal it to everybody. I know a lot of folks are talking about, I think it's April 9th, maybe perhaps Pat McAfee show is going to be doing something in Pittsburgh. Maybe perhaps that's the date and the time. If what you wanted was for him to go out there and get accustomed to the players, I mean, he's already doing it. He's already taking those steps. Does that build any confidence in you that, all right, he's already making those steps even before the contract is started? Does that give you any belief that maybe perhaps he's going to be all in when it comes to training camp and other off-season activities?
Well, I've heard my whole life, and many of former players have said it, if you're contemplating retirement, seriously, you're already there.
Mm-hmm.
And at that age, to get ready and to get into football shape, that's the older than men play too.
Mm-hmm.
So if, him taking his time and contemplating, does he really want to fully invest everything that it will take to come to Pittsburgh and be successful? Then, it kind of makes sense. And then to do a theatrical lead up, like you say, to maybe the McAfee show, something of that nature, that does fit in with his personality, but two, the McAfee would love that.
Mm-hmm.
And Tomlin at this point don't care. I think he's said at the owners meeting that totally revamping the quarterback position again this year, he has no problem with it. He says, now, if we're doing it again next year, then there's an issue. It leads me to believe that they're looking at maybe a Rudolph and maybe a draft pick this year that would be back next year, so that it wouldn't be a total revamp again.
I agree with that.
That's the only way you could say that, because from the rumor, they're only wanting to offer Rodgers 1 year.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I think that they're looking at Mason Rudolph. They've already signed him for a 2-year deal.
Yeah.
And they're looking at the draft. I think Mike Tomlin has mentioned just that. I don't think they're going to go in the first round. I don't think that that's going to be the answer this year. I think that there's a good opportunity that they draft that guy next year. Mm-hmm. But, going into this season, looking at the class that's ahead of you, Mike Tomlin's job isn't to look at next year's draft class or look at what strategy would be 2 or 3 years down the road. His job is to coach the team and the players that he has available to him. That's Omar Khan's job. So just because Mike Tomlin isn't perhaps maybe looking at next year's draft or anything like that, I strongly feel that the way that Omar Khan has kind of worked this offseason so that they can recuperate a maximum amount of compensatory or comp picks leads me to believe that they're really going to try to move in next year's draft to try to get somebody. And I think that's just the move. And I think that, if you go into this year's draft and you end up picking a guy in day 3 or something like that, I don't really see that as a huge risk on the organization. And I don't think that I personally don't think that there's that guy in this year's draft. Maybe perhaps the Pittsburgh Steelers have learned from their Kenny Pickett experiment to wait for a better draft class. But like the title of the show is it's for now. The future can wait. I think the future needs to wait until next year as far as the quarterback position. And so with that being said, whether it's Rodgers or Mason Rudolph, I'm okay with who they put back there. I think that their skill set, either one of them, is going to be able to get the ball to these guys on the outside deep. And I think that's really going to do wonders for this running game. I think with Rodgers, his ability to throw the ball quickly is going to help out the offensive line. I'm honestly excited about Rodgers. I think he's going to – I think he can be a difference maker if he comes in as advertised.
Well, I know they talked to Omar Khan today.
Mm-hmm.
And he was talking about that, yes, they're definitely going to be looking at the quarterback position. And he mentioned free agency, he mentioned the draft, and he mentioned trade.
Mm-hmm.
And he mentioned about also trying to work a deal to trade back into the second round.
Mm.
So with the amount of picks they're going to have next year, and where they need, that second round pick would be nice to have back. So I think we might see some movement leading up to or on draft night. But yeah, I think that, as you say, you can't worry too much about 2 years from now. You got to field a competent team this year, because the Steelers are just not going to accept 5 or 6 wins. That's just not. They're not going to go into the season with those expectations. So they're wanting to compete in the division, as Tomlin said today. So I think they've kind of got a lot of eggs in the Aaron Rodgers basket right now. And, depending on what they can continue to build this offense in the draft here, they could become more of a competent, competitive offense than they were at any point last year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and well, the biggest thing is Aaron Rodgers and Arthur Smith. Are they going to be able to get on the same page? I think that may have been what was what went south both in New York and with the Pittsburgh Steelers with their quarterback Russell Wilson not coming back. Apparently, him and Arthur Smith didn't get along. Aaron Rodgers, I mean, he got his head coach, his offensive coordinator fired. I mean, the entire offensive side of coaching staff was gone for the most part throughout the season last year. Yeah, how do you think that relationship's going to work, if at all?
I think that Rodgers is kind of like Ben and Brady. You know, I think Bruce Arians and Leftwich and them make suggestions to Tom Brady, but they kind of was like, "This is your offense, this is your team. You've won 6 Super Bowls, whatever. We trust you to make this offense successful." And I think towards the end, the only time that Ben had success is when he took over. After Arians left. Well, the way they done Arians, however you want to say it. So, but even then, I think a lot of it was Ben. They had a close relationship, and so therefore Ben could say, "I want to run this play," and Arians like, "Okay," and there was trust there. The problem is Rodgers and Smith. I think they just met basically. When he come to Pittsburgh, and I don't know if Smith will have a problem kind of stepping back and letting Rodgers kind of run things. I could foresee Tomlin having more of an issue with Rodgers kind of running things that he would that Smith would. Let's put it that way. Because Rodgers he likes to sling it around.
Yeah.
And I don't know if Tomlin will be entirely comfortable with that.
Well, I think the one thing that Tomlin could find comfort in is the fact that even though that Rodgers does like to sling the ball around, he's been over his career fairly protective of the ball. Even throwing over the middle, his touchdown to interception rate, ratio has been very impressive throughout his career. I know last year it kind of wasn't the same. You got the aspect. He's 41, going to be 42, coming off an Achilles heel injury. Most people do get better after the first year. How much better depends on the person. He was a guy that was trying to get out there the same year that he got hurt in. Who knows if that did anything? And I will say that last year, towards the end of the year, it did seem like his performance was getting better. We'll see. At the end of the day, he's 41, 42 years old. If he doesn't play well and the offensive line doesn't do what they're supposed to do, we'll probably end up seeing Mason Rudolph in there fairly quickly anyways. I don't want to sound like harsh or anything like that, but at that age, with the offensive line that the Steelers have had and them learning, and still at this point, Fautano hasn't played very much on the right side with Broderick Jones on the left side and Frazier in the middle. They're going to have a learning curve to go through at the same time together. Is Rodgers the quarterback that you want behind that curve?
Well, I think Rodgers could get rid of the ball quickly. And the Steelers are looking, all the running backs they're looking at have hands, can catch the ball in the backfield. Rodgers is very accurate and effective on those passes. And he's good at hitting the quick slants, quick crossers, stuff that, if your line is not up to par, you need to get that ball out. He can do that. And like Mahomes and some of the other guys, he can throw from different arm angles. If he has to kind of throw around a guy that's rushing. So, again, a lot of it's going to depend, as you mentioned, what kind of weapons can they continue to acquire in this draft, and how quickly can the offensive line gel and get up to par if they're just placed and left alone. Now that's counting on health, which we know no offensive line hardly ever goes through the whole year without having an injury or two. You just hope it ain't long term. But it's past time for Pete Meyer's offensive line to step up and play up to potential and capabilities. I believe that Broderick Jones has potential. We haven't got to see it with Troy Fautano, but I believe he's incredibly talented. And we know how good Frazier is. So I believe the pieces are there, and hopefully they'll acquire somebody else in the draft as well. And, you know, if we can see a big step forward and improvement from that unit this year, outside of the normal growing pains, as you said, early in the season. That's where you're going to have to rely on Rodgers being a crafty veteran.
Definitely. He's definitely going to have to be out there doing some, what is that old wily veteran type of stuff, because that offensive line is going to have to learn him as well, which is going to be a huge component, or it's going to be very, important for him to be out there training camp, be a part of Latrobe, be with those youngsters. I mean, what Najee Harris was saying when he was, as a member of the Chargers, talking about the Pittsburgh Steelers and how he went in there, and then there was, just a second-year guy is expected to be, the guy that everybody's looking up to, the role model, and it just wasn't the right atmosphere. And in order for that to change, and I think that Rodgers has that presence to him that he's going to command respect and demand attention from these guys. Like, for instance, I don't think he's going to take light if George Pickens is running slow, or if he's showing up late to a game. I think he's going to get in his face and tell him something about it. If he's not I'm sure he's not going to be afraid of telling the public about it either. In his press conferences, that, hey, I threw the ball here, but it was intercepted because somebody didn't have the effort to run out straight ahead, or whatever the case may be. He's going to throw him under the bus. So if he doesn't want to hear that stuff in a contract year, and he doesn't want that put out there as much as it already is, he's going to have to get his stuff together too, which is why I'm thinking that with all the personalities that are out there on this team, Rodgers, the biggest one there is, maybe the one that's needed to kind of control everything and corral everything. What do you think?
Personality matters. But it's like Washington last year. I mean, Daniels comes in there and he quickly showed his abilities, his talent, more than he showed his leadership at first. In the first couple of weeks, he was running a lot. And everybody was talking about that. And he was drafted for his arm. The kick, he got a great arm. But he is athletic. Well, as the year went on, he started getting better and better. And he started developing with McCorn, that relationship. And then he's tied in, and they started winning. And next thing you know, he's the talk of the town. And a relatively young team there in Washington, everybody loved him, respected him, looked up to him. So if you can have success, if the talent's there and the commitment level's there, part of that leadership is success. People wanted to follow him. They started to believe, because it had been so long since Washington had success. So whoever the Steelers have, whether it's a veteran like Rodgers, will his personality clash? Or will he, because Russell Wilson, let's be honest, was a good dude. I mean, he's going to the children's hospitals. He's saying all the right things. He's tried to take blame for things that happened. He's not throwing anybody under the bus. And there was some people that didn't like him. But it really showed up when they started losing, right? So I think that's the key, that whoever has to be a fit in the offense where they can have success, and they've got to have that sustainable success to have the belief of the team behind them. Like, if they're winning and Pickens does something and Rodgers says something, I think with his Hall of Fame credentials, Pickens might be a little more apt to listen. But just like with Wilson, if it starts going south, Katie bar the door.
Yeah. Yeah, and we're going to take a quick break real quick, and then we get back. We're going to talk more about George Pickens and that in the wide receiver room. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after a couple words from our sponsors. And we're back. Welcome back, everybody, to the channel. Before we get back into the podcast, I want to remind you guys of our website, SteelCurtainNetwork.com, your one-stop shop for Pittsburgh Steelers news and coverage. Make sure you go check it out. You get all the up-to-the-minute, up-to-the-second news and breaking news coverage of the Pittsburgh Steelers if anything were to break. The moment that Rodgers does sign, it's going to be there, so make sure you go and check it out. And while you're there, you can check out the other audio-only podcasts, which include mine, which is State of the Steelers, and airs on Saturdays. Go check it out and let me know what you guys think in the comment section. The quote was, DK is a big man. GP is tall. Referencing DK Metcalf and George Pickens, Mike Tomlin, when asked about the two. I think that, not just the $150 million contract solidifying that DK Metcalf is wide receiver one. I think also it's time to play maybe a little bit of tough love with George Pickens. I think that they're taking the gloves off this year and maybe not just handling him with kid gloves because they're afraid of how he's going to react. And I think that statement was just the first of many if he doesn't get his stuff together. What do you think?
Oh, I definitely do. I mean, there's talk of them maybe taking a wide receiver in round one.
Mm-hmm.
If the young man from Ohio State was to fall, or another wide receiver that they really like, I believe that it could be a day 2 pick, maybe round 3. There's some really good options there as well, but I believe they're going to take one because, depending on how this year goes, they might want to try to trade Pickens sometime before the trade deadline. And if not, and he works out great, you want to have the best receiver group you can have for a quarterback coming in, let's say a young quarterback next year, and you'd want to have Metcalf. You could franchise tag Pickens if he has a big year this year, and you'd have a rookie, one of your top 3 receivers. So I think it makes sense because whether it's Rodgers this year or, a young guy next year, you want to have that talent around him. But yeah, Pickens, it's going to have to be a tough love situation. And now that with Metcalf being there, hopefully they won't be overly dependent on Pickens like they were last year.
I hope so too. And I think that, I still think that he can get paid because it seems to me that the goal, not to go back into quarterbacks, but goal is to draft a quarterback next year. And so you're not looking at, investing a lot of money in the near future for the quarterback position. Even if Aaron Rodgers goes in there and he balls out and he plays all 17 games, he gets very deep in the playoffs or even pulls it off and the Steelers get number 7 and he decides he wants to come back next year. I still think that in that draft, you're going to be drafting his successor because now he'll be 42 going 43. And really, truly, how much time does he have left? And so I think that you're going into that notion thinking, all right, we're not going to be investing a tremendous amount of money in the quarterback position for the next few years. Often, the tackles is probably the same thing. And so, you could probably go out there and pay a George Pickens and also a DK Metcalf. But I think that there's got to be some prove it years there for George. He's going to have to go in there and prove it. And I think even at that, this year, I think he's going to end up getting franchise tagged, as you mentioned, and have to prove it again before he gets payday. And I believe when it comes to like DK Metcalf, now I know it's a 5-year, $150 million contract, but there's a lot of fluff added to the end of that contract. I think I've heard some folks say it's in reality more like a 3-year, $86, $89 million contract. And, if that ends up being the case, I mean, that's around the time that maybe George Pickens could actually realistically expect a long-term deal if his, behavior off the field and between, outside of the whistles match up to what he's doing between the whistles and the effort increases, in my opinion. But
Did you hear what his dad said?
I did. That was
He talking about the quarterbacks he'd been playing, and he said, how tough it'd been on George, and he couldn't imagine, and I'm thinking, well, there's some truth in that, with the quarterbacks he's played for, but again, not all circumstances are perfect, and how you handle it says a lot about you. And there's the problem I have is I'm not saying it was all his fault, but how he handles and responds to it, that is on him.
Yeah. George Pickens' father, he's former receiver, right? Carl Pickens. Isn't his dad a former receiver? George's dad?
I didn't think Carl Pickens was his dad.
I think it is.
I have not looked to see.
I
thought that would be because Carl Pickens played for the Bengals.
Yeah.
And I figured they would talk about it on every podcast and on every game day if that was the case. So I just never assumed he was Carl's boy.
Yeah. Well, according to Wikipedia, he is.
Well, I know where he got his athleticism from.
Yeah, maybe the attitude too.
Well, that's true, but his dad was a baller. He was a fighter, which I'm not. And I mean fighting during the play.
Yeah,
to get open. I ain't talking about after the play like George does.
Yeah. True story. I actually saw that not too long ago. I was, I don't know what I was researching, and something popped up, and it said Carl Pickens, George Pickens, is his father, and I was like, really? I was like, I know they have the same last name, but why isn't that brought up everywhere? I would have thought it would have been brought up.
I thought it'd be talked about a lot more. Yeah.
That's maybe I'm wrong. Maybe not. Everything I'm reading says it's true. So, well, I'm not surprised the Bengal would be throwing the Steelers under the bus there, talking stuff about it. Talking bad about the quarterbacks there for the Pittsburgh Steelers when they finally got one after I don't know, the first time. So yeah, it is what it is. Do you think, and I know you brought it up earlier, potentially getting a second round draft pick? Some folks think maybe perhaps George Pickens is on the line. I don't think so. I think DK Metcalf wearing number 4, and the fact that last season they wanted to trade for a receiver, but they wouldn't give up George. So it tells me they wanted to add to the room with George there. Yeah. So it's possible George gets traded. The other thing I could think of is they trade back, something they haven't done since, I believe, Big Snack. Casey Hampton was the last time they traded back and drafted somebody in the first round. What do you think of the possibility there? It's this time around, they're looking at defensive linemen just like they were then. You think that this could be the year that they trade back and acquire some draft picks?
Well, I'm always in favor of manipulating the first round. Either move up if a guy falls in a range that you really feel like it's worth moving up. But when you want extra selections, that's when you want to move back if there's not anybody you're particularly targeting in your current position. And as you say, they're talking about defensive tackles. There's a couple of the receivers. There's a couple of safeties they're really interested in, it sounds like. And early second round, there's a lot of offensive linemen even.
Mm-hmm.
So in a draft that doesn't have great depth, after the 4th round, the Pickens, it kind of gets slim Pickens. Yeah. Not a pun there, but it's slim Pickens after the 4th. I think that if you can move up by moving back in the first round and to get you that second round guy, that second round pick back, this is the year to do it.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think you have the, especially like you mentioned, the line being as strong as it is of a draft class this year. That tells me that there's a good opportunity to do it this year. You move back, so what does that leave for you? I mean, for me, I think that you have defensive lineman, running back, cornerback, wide receiver, quarterback. I mean, those are your the ones that I think you need to pick up for the most part. What order do you pick those guys up in?
Well, in the past, the Steelers have always went best player available / at an area of need.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always been for that because the Steelers were very limited in their ability to be aggressive in free agency. Well, we know that they had a lot more money, but they were very frugal this offseason. And they added a lot of guys. Eccles, Slay, they added to the secondary already. They added the young man, oh gosh, Esquale from the Patriots, the defensive lineman.
Yeah.
They picked up another guy. So they've been trying to address the depth at each of these positions. They even picked up the one guard, Smith, for the offensive line. So they've been addressing some stuff so they wouldn't feel pressured at a position of need because they wanted to get generational guys. And when I say generational guys, I don't mean a guy Hall of Fame per se. I'm talking about a guy that you could plug in there and he might can play for 10 years for you. I mean that he's just he could be that right fit, that special addition, like the safety out of Maryland, or if they think one of these defensive linemen can be that. Because they've lacked the guy in the middle since Tyson Alulu, he didn't retire, but they let him go.
Mm-hmm.
And but if you think about it, he come over from Jacksonville, and he never lived up to his draft position, and they put him in there to nose tackle, and he turned out to be a great pickup for the Steelers when they had Tuitt and him and Hayward.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that, in my opinion, you're going to go for the guy who, the highest rated guy, regardless of position, that you feel can be that long-term answer. So if it's the kid from Ohio State, wide receiver, Grant from Michigan, there's certain guys that, if you're going to try to trade back a little bit, that if you don't trade back, you want to go for one of them guys.
Mm-hmm.
If you trade back, you have more of a late first-round guy in mind, like, say, a Grant.
Yeah. Who's a guy that if he's there, you don't trade back at 21? You run to the podium and you select. Who is there a guy in the draft that fits that role for you?
Well, again, the wide receiver out of Ohio State. If I say his name, I can say it, but I'll butcher it if I try to say it. I think that again, the safety for Maryland. I mean, I don't see how he could fall that far, but if he did, yeah, you just take it. I mean, you're just running up there.
Mm-hmm.
But partly because those positions are not as deep. Now, if it's an defensive lineman, you can. There's multiple guys that would fit what the Steelers want, so you could kind of trade back, in the first, hopefully. But the big question is, what if a guy like Sanders at quarterback? What if some crazy thing, he falls and he keeps falling, and he's getting close to your pick? I mean, it's the kid that was thought of being the first or second pick for sure. And then he starts falling. What would the Steelers do?
put an hourglass in the front of the facility and call it Days of Our Lives because the drama will be real. I mean, I don't know. I mean, if the Steelers ended up getting Sanders, I would. I mean, that's a lot of personalities at the Pittsburgh Steelers. I mean, and I'm not even talking about the kid. I think he's a good kid. I think some folks may be taking some things he said out of overblowing what he said. I think a lot of people look at his dad and say, "Is that going to be an obstacle? Is that is he going to have opinions out there about the team if they're not playing well? That's going to force the team to focus on answering questions about Prime. I think that's what I think a lot of people are kind of concerned about. I've gone back and looked at some of his games, and he's a lot better than I thought he was. I think you're correct about him being willing to take a hit and stay in there and throw the ball and the accuracy on the ball. I'm not entirely sold on the zip or the strength yet, but has he thrown at a pro day or anything like that? I don't think he threw at the combine, but I haven't seen him throw at a pro day yet. Has he?
I haven't seen it either. I don't think so.
I would like to see
they've
that.
had their pro day yet.
See, I hope he does. If he throws at a pro day and I can see the velocity that he has on the ball, how far he can throw an NFL ball, how it pops off his hand, that could be a pretty big deciding factor. When it came to like Kenny Pickett, I think one of the biggest issues was the arm strength. It's not so much the hand size, it was the arm strength. And in Pittsburgh, when it's a cold weather place,
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have to be able to throw into the wind. And especially when you have some of these teams like the Kansas City Chiefs or the Buffalo Bills, where those are the competitive teams that are doing really well right now. Those are cold weather teams that if you are wanting to get far into the playoffs, those are probably places you're going to have to play at. And you expecting to have your quarterback make those type of throws. And so that's what I want to see out of him. Because in Colorado, there's dinner there. You can throw the ball a mile up there.
Well, I remember his daddy well. There was a talk recently who was the best between Dion and Rod Woodson. To me, it's Rod Woodson every day, all day, always will be, because we got to remember Rod Woodson was no drama, and Rod Woodson tackled. He could blitz, he could tackle. He did everything Dion could do, but he was a more physical, full complementary football player, and that he could tackle. And Dion didn't want to tackle, so he just didn't let you catch it. That way, he didn't have to worry about tackling you. But I never thought of Dion as being tough. But if you watch his son, he's different. I don't think he has his dad's personality. I think he has more of his dad was all about him. Dion was about Dion and the brand.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the son, in my opinion, is about winning, about helping whatever team he's playing for be successful. And you watch, I don't know if you watch some of the combine, but the other quarterbacks and the other people gravitate towards him. I think he has a certain presence about himself, maybe from growing up privileged. It's not overwhelming for him, and he carries a certain confidence and an aura about him that I think helps guys follow him and want to be around him. And because I was shocked that I thought maybe some of them other players would, because he, the things he was saying that I agree with you. I think that some of the stuff was taken out of context to kind of portray him in a bad light, which I don't think is fair to him. But I do think that he has the level of confidence that I haven't seen in one of these young quarterbacks since Baker Mayfield. And if you're going to come in and expect to take over a huddle at the NFL level, you're going to have a certain level of self-confidence. So I think that, there's a better chance than not that he comes in and is more successful than Cam Ward. I'll say it right now. Last year, I said that Daniels was the best quarterback in that class, not Williams. And I still stand by that. Now, I don't think Williams played bad, especially playing in Chicago. But I questioned Williams' personality and his alpha male, which you need to be the leader of a championship team. I don't know if Williams has it. Daniels does. And I'll say the same thing about Sanders. I think is more prepared. His maturity, and he's more prepared than Ward is coming in.
I agree. And as far as last year, I mean, I think Daniels was definitely definitely the better quarterback today. I thought that Williams was a little bit on the shorter end. I wasn't too fond of him painting his nails. I guess that could go to the tough aspect that you were speaking about. But yeah, this year, I think that when I look at what Cam Ward was doing, and I mentioned this before, I've looked at some of his highlights just to kind of see what the hype was about. And there's a lot of just, him standing in the pocket, just kind of kicking back and then throwing it flat footed and, not a lot of pressure to him. And, I know he's got some mobility to him. And I think that also may have taken an effect as to why he had that ability to just kind of sit back there. I think that defenses were, trying to maybe contain him by utilizing, middle linebackers as such to spy on him. But either way, I don't think that's going to fly in the NFL. I think there's a lot faster defensive players, and they'll catch up to him. And as fast as he is and the mobility that he has, I don't see Lamar Jackson there. And even a guy like Lamar Jackson, who's, early on in his career really made a living off of his legs, it was still limited. He still hasn't gotten that far into the playoffs. Because he has, I think he's gotten there. I think he's gotten better as a quarterback as the years progressed, but, he is where he's at. And so, yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right about Sanders. I think he might be the top QB in this draft. If he's there at 21, should the Steelers run up there and get him? I mean, that would really throw a wrench in what they're doing in next year, don't you think?
Well, I mean, I'm even saying 17. Let's say, because with the situation as is, a guy was expected to be number 1 or number 2. If he was to make it into that range, you're needing a future long-term quarterback. Depending on what you have to give up, you might take a shot. And watching all these top quarterbacks, I'm much higher on Sanders and Dart than I am on Ward and a couple of the other guys. And here's why. Ward was in an explosive offense, as you said, had good protection. And you look at the windows he was throwing into, wide open. You look at Howard, the quarterback from Ohio State. All of his receivers are going to be in the pros. I mean, he was throwing at some wide open guys, even at the top level of competition and even in the playoffs. This wasn't the small passing windows that you see in the NFL. But if you watch Dart in the SEC, he did not have future NFL wide receivers that was getting wide open. Smaller windows, right? And he was able to hit them. Sanders, same thing. He didn't have the offensive line in front of him. So he was making off-platform, improvising, just like Dart. Dart does the same thing. Look at the guys that are successful in the pros. And I'll throw a name out there. Brock Purdy. Anybody watch Brock Purdy when he played at Iowa State? they were not a super talented offense, super talented team. And he made a lot of off-schedule plays, moving around, extending the play, putting the ball into tight windows. But what has he done since he's been with the 49ers? Same thing. He come in and he was able to do that. Did Kenny Pickett show that at Pitt? Not really. So Kenny's not had this success, even though he didn't have the talent around him that Purdy had either. But you have to look at everything. And I do believe that Dart and Sanders is more prepared for the level of throws they're going to have to make at the NFL level.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I think him. I think Tyler Shock is another guy that I think could be a potential guy if he's there in the 4th, 5th round. I'd be interested in a Tyler Shock.
He's got a lot of arm talent.
Yeah,
and he's got a lot of experience at 26. So,
I mean, he could be the next Bo Nix. Bo Nix was pretty old, coming out last year.
But same thing with Bo Nix. I mean, he made some tough throws against tough competition with good receivers, but not great receivers.
Yeah.
And, so I thought he was going to be the next Kenny Pickett, but he proved me dead wrong.
Yeah, I when I saw him playing, I saw him play a couple games in Oregon, and I thought Bo Nix was going to be a little bit better than Kenny. I thought he was. I didn't think he was going to have the year that he had, but I thought it was going to be better than Kenny. But this year, yeah, Sanders. There's a few guys. Me personally, I'm just hoping they end up getting the guy that's local to me, Manning, who's up the street.
I figured you want yours.
Well, no, I
don't have an NFL arm.
He can throw a mile. He just doesn't. He's not very accurate. And I think he's had a few injuries throughout his career. Staying on the field might be a question mark, for the kid. I think they have a video of him throwing it 70 yards, but it's a duck. And he's gotten better since then. But he's still, the accuracy's not there. Maybe he can develop maybe with an NFL coaching, offensive, quarterbacks coach and, coaching him up. Maybe perhaps he can be something. But Archie Manning, I think, is the guy that here in Texas, that is, he's the guy. I mean, everybody was waiting for him to play last year. I think a lot of people were disappointed that yours didn't go into the draft last season because they were ready to see Manning. But we'll see. He may play next year and decide to stay another year. He's fairly young, so there's no guarantee he'll be in next year's draft either. You know what I mean?
Well, we know the Mannings like to kind of manipulate where they go.
That's
and he
true.
might look at who the opportunity where he might go, and he might be like, I'm going to go back to college. Especially now where you get NIL money.
Mm-hmm.
And it ain't like he's hurting for money in that family.
Mm-hmm.
So, as you say, he might go back.
Yeah, exactly. There's no guarantee. And so there's no guarantee in any draft that any of these guys are going to be anything. I think Trevor Lawrence was supposed to be the next Manning, and that clearly hasn't happened. I think he's an okay quarterback, but he's not Peyton Manning.
I don't not like the surrounding cast, who his coaches. Urban Meyer was a terrible decision when they brought him in. Terrible fit for that young man and that offense. He might have to get out of Jacksonville to reach his potential. And I was, when they was talking about him coming to Pittsburgh, I'd be all for it. Because if I'm investing a large amount of your cap in your future, you don't want a Deshaun Watson. You want a Trevor Lawrence. You want a guy that's not going to be any problems on the field, off the field. There's low risk. The kid has talent. He just needs a better supporting cast and a better coaching staff. In my opinion, I just think that who's the best receiver he's ever had? Christian Kirk?
Ridley? Was Calvin
maybe Ridley? I think Kirk's had more, because Ridley got suspended, of course, but
Yeah.
I mean, he needs a new change of scenery, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe so. Maybe so. But there's, like I said, there's no guarantee in any of the drafts. You got to play and pick the players that are best to make your team fit this year, and let Omar Khan do the rest, right? And that's what Mike Tomlin's doing. Do you have any final words for anything else you want to bring up before we call it a show?
I think it's interesting listening to Khan and Tomlin and the guys that they're looking at, especially focusing on at pro days. All the running backs, to me, is admitting their mistake with Najee Harris. Because the guys they're looking at have burst, have short area quickness, have speed, have hands. They realize that, again, not saying that Harris is a bad player. He was overdrafted, just like Terrell Edmonds. He was overdrafted in the first round. He should have never been in the first round. He was a terrible fit for the Steelers offense. And I wish him nothing but the best, as long as they ain't playing Pittsburgh. But I do like the fact that the guys they're looking at now are a much better scheme fit. And if they could get one of these guys in the draft, it'll all not only help the offense, because last year they were woefully thin at explosive skill position talent. They didn't have any threats, and you need that. But I think that it will also help the offensive line look better, because there was times that they would keep their blocks, but he was getting run down from behind by a defensive lineman.
Yeah.
Whereas if he could have turned that corner, they was, some yardage there. So, we just got to keep paying attention, and by who they're inviting in for the visits and who they're really focusing on at the pro days, as it always is with the Steelers, it's given us a peek behind the curtain, so to speak.
True story, man. Good final words there. I think everybody appreciated that. Yeah, I agree 100% with you. Everybody that's tuning in, please hit the like button. Please hit the subscribe button, ring that notification bell. Shannon will be back on the Pump Your Brakes on Wednesday. I'll be back on the audio-only side on Saturday on State of the Steelers. The only way you can listen to that is if you go in and go to the steelcurtainnetwork.com website or wherever you find your podcast and look for State of the Steelers there. That being said, Shannon, take us out, my man.